Welcome to Paranormal M, the channel where we explore the world of the paranormal and supernatural. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay up to date with our latest bone-chilling stories. We hope you enjoy your stay. Christmas '88. I was 9. It was Christmas Eve, 1988, and my family's Christmas Eve party was winding down. My grandma was digging through the remnants of boxes, bows, and wrapping papers from our family's white elephant gift exchange to see what she could salvage for next year, and my mother and aunt were laughing and trading stories of holidays past. My 2 older half-sisters, Sherry and Penny, who were adults at the time, being 18 and 20 years older than me, were picking over the leftovers on the dining room table. I was sitting near the back of the Christmas tree, where 3 gifts with my name on them remained. These were from my mom and grandma, and it was a tradition that I could only open up 1 gift before bedtime on Christmas Eve. The rest I had to wait and open with my Santa gifts on Christmas morning. I assessed the 3 packages for some time before making my selection. It was nearing midnight. I had to be in bed soon, so I decided to just pick the biggest because it had weight and didn't sound like clothes when I shook it. When my mom said it was time, I eagerly unwrapped the gift. At my grandma's unspoken request, I was careful not to rip the paper or to mess up the bow and set them aside as my gift was revealed. It was a telescope. It wasn't a high-quality count the rings of Saturn type, though. It was small, mostly made of plastic, and still had the $14.99 price sticker on the box. I was gracious, though. I wasn't impressed. Though, not because of the quality. I didn't know the difference between a nice telescope and a cheap toy one, because I simply had no interest in its function, and even if I was interested in what it did, the simple assembly required to make it work exceeded the grasp of my exceptionally short attention span. Now, my sister Sherry is the oldest, and to me back then, she was like a bossy hall monitor. She had no real authority, but that didn't stop her from trying to run everything. I'm 41 now, and she's 61, and seriously, not much has changed in that aspect. My other sister Penny is just 2 years younger than Sherry, so she would have been 29 at that time. She was different. A combination of unattended schizophrenia and drug abuse made her a wild card, meaning you never knew what you were going to get with her. On this night, she had managed to maintain a level of normalcy and a jovial mood. Though, under any circumstance at that time, and regardless of her behavior, her personality seemed more comparable to mine rather than that of any other adult in the room. Penny took an enthusiastic interest in my new gift, and asked if we could go out back and test it out. I agreed, knowing that my compliance would afford me a bit more time before I had to go to bed, and being a child on the night before Christmas, I was naturally restless. Penny and I ascended into the back porch, and in no time at all, my sister had the telescope assembled and in position for celestial exploration. It took her a bit longer to find a point of focus and adjust all the little knobs for optimal viewing, so while she was occupied with that, my attention was drawn to the icicles that formed on the awning, and the dog's water bowl that had turned to solid ice. Being a Texan, this isn't generally common even for December, though it isn't generally uncommon either. Our winters are short, and much like my eccentric sister, you never know what you're going to get when it arrives. I feel the need to preface this next part of my story with 2 very important points. First, I need to say that my memory of this incident, however perplexing as it is, cleared. It's vivid to me now that the very night it occurred, so this is a true and accurate account. Secondly, this entire event lasted no more than a minute, and while I must describe these events in succession, many of them occurred all at once. I had just taken off my mittens so I can utilize the full function of my hands and fingers for grasping when I heard Penny explain in amusement Whoa, cool. Still having no interest at all in stargazing, and far more focused on trying to retrieve the perfect icicle from the awning using a garden hoe. I didn't even look up from what I was doing, figuring she had it managed to find something bright to look at, and that just meant I had a bit more time to spend on trying to dislodge the big beautiful icicle before it melted. Then it occurred to me that the icicle was definitely melting, and quite rapidly, when just moments before, it was still in the process of forming. Now it's dripping like a leaky faucet, and what was even stranger was that all this water was dripping around me, yet it made no sound. In fact, nothing made a sound. Not the water, or the wind, or the highway in the distance. Not even my sister tinkering with that telescope. Then the dripping slowed. And I don't mean that in the sense that there was more time between each drop, but rather the droplets were taking longer to fall to the ground. Confused, I immediately looked over at my sister and found her standing upright, not bent over, peering into the telescope, but staring out into the yard. I turned to match her gaze, and what I saw completely eluded the grasp of my 9-year-old comprehension. Hovering a mere 4 feet above my backyard fence was an almost almond-shaped capsule, about the size of a pontoon boat. It was a metallic color like chrome, with no discernible crevasses, no windows, no doors. It was completely flush, and even though it had no fixtures for light or to shine from, the area around it was completely illuminated as light reflected off millions of water droplets now suspended in midair. I was struck with fear and confusion as I broke my gaze just long enough to look over at my sister, searching for some sort of sign as to what this thing was and if we were in any danger. Penny looked over at me, grinning from ear to ear. "Cindy Boo, it's a UFO." I didn't hear her say it, and her lips didn't move, but that's what she said. We both looked back at the object and tilted slightly downward. At this angle, it appeared to be spinning as a flash of iridescent lights made one complete rotation around its exterior, then in a split second shot straight up and disappeared into the night sky. Darkness resumed along with all the sounds of the night and the crisp chill of the air. I stood dumbfounded, amazed, and terrified by what I'd just experienced, while at the same time, I felt relief that it was over, and excited. I didn't know whether to run away or cry or laugh. I looked over at my sister, wanting to run to her, but still frozen to the place I stood, as if all my cognitive resources were occupied, trying to process everything, and I was monumentally unable to communicate movement to my legs. Penny was clearly not frightened by what we had just witnessed. She seemed just as blissful as I'd ever seen her, and while at times I found that refreshing, in this instance, it confused me. I needed to observe a regular adult response. Claiming the use of my legs, I ran toward the door saying, "Let's go, Mom." "Yeah," Penny agreed and followed me through the back door. I was glad she was there and had my back. I knew there was no way my mom would believe me about a spaceship if it had been only me, running in with my Kmart telescope. We entered the dining room where Mom stood laughing as my grandma sang the phrase, "We won't go until we get some." I exclaimed, "Mom, me and Penny just saw..." Briefly, I forgot what my sister had called it, but she chimed in to assist. "A UFO!" Penny injected. "You did? With your new telescope?" Mom inquired. "No, it was in the backyard by my fort, right above the fence, and I wanted to tell her everything all at once, but I just wasn't fast or articulate enough to express what had all transpired. And my mom was a regular adult who saw me as an imaginative child, and my sister, well, as well, I guess, as a somewhat mild version of a crazy person she expected to show by the end of the night. Maybe it was Santa. I hope he doesn't pass you up because you're not in bed. I didn't believe in Santa Claus, and I never did. I just pretended for as long as I could for the extra presents. I did understand the situation I was in, though. I knew Mom was done for the night, and I wanted to go to bed so they could set up the Santa gifts and finally get some rest themselves. Not to mention, she was usually well within the bounds of good insight by steering away from conversations featuring supernatural events with my sister. It just so happened that on this occasion, it was all true, and I understood that she would never know that. Shortly after that movie came out called Fire in the Sky, starring D.B. Sweeney, based on true events about a small-town man who's allegedly abducted by aliens, experimented on, and returned. The movie, coupled with my memory of that event, terrified me beyond expression, causing me to have night terrors throughout my childhood about the visitors returning to claim me. And I'm certain it initiated my lifelong battle with sleep paralysis dreams. I was so terrified I wouldn't watch or read anything that had anything to do with extraterrestrials, and I wouldn't speak of it again for nearly 30 years. Somewhere in that span of time, I convinced myself that the entire event had been a terrible nightmare that had happened. Just to remember every single detail, down to the mittens I was wearing, where they landed on the ground, when I took them off, and the rush of heat I felt, hot on my cheeks from the fireplace when I ran back into the house that night. My sister was estranged for many years throughout my childhood, as her condition got worse before it began to get better. She finally got clean and onto the right meds, and a few years ago she came to live with us. The first week she was here, she spent a lot of time talking about different things that happened over the years. Things she'd seen and things she'd done. I discovered that she barely had any recollection of any great deal of it, claiming that must have been the other me. I guess I got caught up in the spirit of sharing, or I got brave or something. But I decided to ask her about that night during one of our talks. Do you remember that one Christmas Eve? Is all I got out of my mouth before we responded with, "You mean the night we saw the UFO in the backyard?" That's a memory that stuck. I remember it as clear as yesterday. She proceeded to describe the experience from a perspective with a little variation from my own experience. So there it is. It was not a dream. It was not a 9-year-old imagination. All those little details that made no sense, the ones I used to tell myself if they didn't happen, are the same details that later on affirm the reality of it. I saw a UFO in my backyard on Christmas Eve in 1988. I was 9 years old. The sleepover gone wrong. Okay, it was my sister's birthday, and me and all my friends were planning a huge slumber party. Turns out only one of them got to stay. Well, 2 including him and his little brother. But anyways, we had a good time. Skateboarded, basketball, and video games. But when night came, they were trying to go to sleep. I couldn't sleep at all. I heard something slapping my window. It was no tree. I'm on the 2nd floor of my house, and there were no trees nearby other than in our backyard, but nowhere close to my window. We heard bumping. I remember my friend just staring out the window, shocked, so we decided to sleep somewhere else. We woke up his little brother, we got up, and went to our bonus room, and we heard walking in my sister's room, and no one was in there. They were sleeping somewhere else. We were so scared we went to our other sister's room. We thought it was safe there, but bad idea. I realized my sister would realize her younger brother and his friends were hiding in the room of her bedroom. I'm the middle, oldest child, so we just went out of there. Then we resorted to go back into my room. My friend felt like he was being watched. He kept staring at the ceiling. We decided it was best to go to sleep. Next morning, we went on with our day as casually as we could. And back at school, we told our friends. They wouldn't buy it. They said it was probably a tree, when there wasn't a tree by my window. It was annoying. So now my friends only come here to investigate why my house is so creepy, because there are so many scary things that happen here. I know this is really scary because there are so many things that it could have been, But imagine having to get up at 1:30 a.m. because your window's getting knocked on so much. Back like 2 years ago, when I moved here, I'd went to a graveyard that was set like 2 blocks away from my house with a friend. We were kind of just walking around and looking at the graves. And this happens also to be a graveyard that a family friend was buried in. We were sort of messing with each other a little and were like, "Whoa, did you hear that?" But obviously implying it's a joke. And another one until we actually freaked out because we had both heard a third pair of footsteps walking behind us. We both turned around at the same time and looked at each other, hoping the other didn't think they were crazy. We laughed it off, saying it was just an echo, which didn't even make sense, but we went with it. Later, when we were leaving to go back to my house, we were walking on the trail, and I had seen a man standing over an old white grave. He looked genuinely depressed. I looked over to my friend and said, "Aw, that's so sweet and kind of sad." And then she looked back at me incredibly confused, asking what I was talking about. I pointed over to the man, and she looked over and told me she didn't see anyone. I thought she was fucking with me until I realized she was actually genuinely concerned. And when I was still looking around, and the man looked up at me, right at me, and we passed a tree that blocked my vision for a second. But when I could see the grave again, he was gone. It felt like something out of a horror movie. We talked about it for a bit after that, but it never came up again after a couple days. Since then, a few weird things have been happening at my house that I just can't explain. They weren't really little things either. Since this is already a lot of reading, I'll just say a few that bothered me the most. There was the one time my sister and I had gotten locked in one of the downstairs rooms for 3 hours with no one to let us out. However, the door didn't even have a lock. Maybe the doorknob just got stuck or something, but the way it was just didn't make any sense. Anyways, my sister and I were having a casual conversation and walked into the room. And by instinct, I had closed the door to keep the cat out, because we didn't let the cats into the room to stop them from peeing on things. We had kept talking for about 10 minutes, but I remembered I had to go do something, so I went to go leave, and the door wouldn't open. The knob would just turn, but the door still wouldn't open, wouldn't even budge a little. After 20 minutes or so of pulling and tugging on the door as hard as I could, even trying kicking and ramming into it, I got the genius idea to remove the hinges so I could just get the door off. The first two came out super easy because the hinges had just been greased, but the last one, just like the door, wouldn't move. No matter how hard I tried to get it out, I couldn't. We ended up being stuck there for 3 hours before we got desperate and called for our dad to come help. He ended up busting the door down and breaking the door, but it was necessary. I couldn't have just been some malfunction with the doorknob system, but it felt like someone was holding the door shut. Another time, I was upstairs cleaning and listening to music. I went to the kitchen to put a few dishes from the table into the dishwasher, and I went back to the living room to change the song, but noticed a random puddle of blood dripped weirdly across the floor. I panicked and checked myself everywhere for a cut or something and found nothing. I cleaned the blood, and that was that. Nothing else happened. It was just odd. There was this other time when the same friend I went to the graveyard with was spending the night, and she had just come upstairs, pale, white, and freaked out, trying to tell me something. She told me she just saw a white figure staring at her while she was changing, and that it couldn't have been her or clothes. It had a face, and it was pure white. She left shortly after that. Couldn't really blame her, to be honest. When I was growing up, my older brother had an insatiable fascination with ghosts and the paranormal. He would constantly read books and watch shows about these topics. and he'd often try to scare me by telling me ghost stories or making spooky noises in the dark. However, his obsession with the supernatural reached a new level when he purchased a doll from a website that claimed to contain trapped souls. According to my brother, the doll he bought had a young girl's soul trapped inside of it. He would show it to me, and just looking at the creepy, lifeless eyes of the doll was enough to send shivers down my spine. But my brother didn't stop there. He would often chase me around the house with the doll, laughing as I screamed and cried in horror. The night when I was in middle school, I was doing homework at my desk in my room. Suddenly I felt a sharp pinch on my leg, and when I looked down, I saw a small, visible bruise in the exact spot where I'd felt the pinch. I was confused and scared, but I tried to shrug it off and continue with my work. Later that night, my brother and I were watching TV in the living room. I hadn't told him about the strange incident with the pinch and the bruise, but out of nowhere, he told me that he had felt a pinch on his leg while he was playing video games in his room. He laughed and said that he thought it was the doll, trying to scare me even more. My heart sank when I heard this, because I knew that something weird was going on. I told my brother about the pinch and the bruise on my leg, and he showed me that he had the same bruise in the same spot. We were both freaked out, and we slept with the lights on for weeks afterwards. Now that I'm 24 years old, I still think about that creepy doll from time to time. I suppose it's possible that the bruise and the pinch were just a coincidence, but it seemed too strange to be a bug or some other normal explanation. My brother still has the doll, but thankfully nothing paranormal has happened since that one unsettling experience. But who knows? Maybe the doll is still holding on to its ghostly secrets, waiting to reveal them to us once again. The Biltmore Hotel. When I was 17 years old, my best friend, who was 16 at the time, and I took a trip to the Biltmore Hotel in Florida, after watching a Sam and Colby video about it. Of course, we couldn't find the luxurious presidential suite that they stayed in, so we settled for a room that was known to be haunted instead. We packed our belongings and began to set up for a seance. We wanted to make sure that we were respectful, so we lit candles and introduced ourselves to any entities that might be present. Then we called out to them, saying, "Hello, spirits. We come in here with full respect and come not to harm, but to investigate. If there's anyone here with us, could you give us a clear sign of your presence?" About 15 seconds later, we heard a knock on the wall opposite us. We brushed it off, thinking it might have been people staying in the next room, since we were in a well-known hotel. But when we called out again and asked if someone or something was trying to communicate with us, we heard 2 knocks from the same wall. We weren't sure if it was a coincidence, so we brought out a piece of ghost hunting equipment called a spirit box. We connected it to a soundproof pair of headphones, and my best friend put them on. She closed her eyes, and I relaxed so that we could begin to do the Estes method, a technique that involves sensory deprivation. I began to ask questions to anything that could be present, starting with, "Is there anything here with us?" My best friend then called out, "It's me." But there was no way she could have heard my question being asked. I took a deep breath and I asked, "Who is here with us?" My best friend responded with, "Devil and malicious." I was spooked and tapped my friend to stop the session. But as we were about to pack up and leave, the wardrobe door to the right side of us flung open, and a white robe fell off the hanger. It was a chilling moment, and we were both left feeling unsettled. Looking back on it now, I still get goosebumps thinking about that experience. It was a reminder that the paranormal world is unpredictable and mysterious, and we should always use caution when venturing into it. red orbs right in front of me. This is something that happened last night. I didn't believe this was a no-sleep story, but I was hoping someone here could explain this or share their experience with me to help me feel better. But I should also give you a little context about myself. To start, I sleep on the opposite end of the bed, where normal people would put their feet, I guess you could say. I switch it up occasionally. Sometimes I sleep on the normal end, but more often than not, my head is at the end of the bed, and my feet is where the head would go, I guess. It's a nightmare sometimes when my pillows fall off the ground because it's at the foot of the bed, and there isn't a reliable headboard. I don't have a personal reason as to why I do this, but when people ask, I usually tell them it's because I don't like my cat sleeping near my head. They like to look out the window, especially when I keep it open, so it's a win-win. They get to look out the window when they want, but they're still at my feet. To be frank, I don't care if they sleep near my head. My brain just tells me this isn't normal, so I feel like I have to come up with an excuse. But I do this simply because I want to, no other reason than that. At the head of my bed are 2 windows, as I previously stated. When I lay down, I'm looking at these 2 windows, and directly behind me is my bedroom door. Now, I'm not a spiritual person. However, I do believe in the paranormal. I've had a few experiences growing up, but this takes the cake, and I'm still reeling from it. What it was, what I could be. What's the explanation? Or most importantly to me, will it happen again? Anyways, I was getting ready for bed last night. I wasn't particularly tired, as I struggled with insomnia, but sometimes, if I lay in bed long enough, I'll fall asleep. The sleep isn't restful, as I'd wake up in the morning aching all over, but that's another story. I had used the restroom, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed. I made sure to leave the door cracked open for the cats. I have 2 cats, but one of mine prefers my roommate's room, and my roommate's cat prefers my room. My youngest cat sleeps on the nightstand that overlooks the window, and Hannibal, my roommate's cat, takes the bed. I reached for my lamp and turned it off. I put in some earbuds for the next half hour or so and closed my eyes. Eventually, I get bored of the music, take my headphones out to charge my phone. Wired earbuds are better than Bluetooth ones, no debate needed, and I see it. 4 red dots at the end of my bed, right in front of me. They were lined up in a square formation, 2 dots on top, 2 dots on the bottom. I, of course, freaked out, but I was also curious. I looked around my room thinking it was the reflection from somewhere. I even peeked out the window for good measure. Nothing. I looked behind me thinking I left a light on, and this was the result. But still, nothing. My roommate was out of town this weekend and didn't come back until today, so it wasn't her. Then I'm pretty sure I saw it blink. These were 4 red dots, barely over the size of a laser pointer, and they didn't just flash on then off again. It was like an eyelid slowly covering the eye, and then open. 2 things happened. 1, my flight response was triggered, but my fight response was too. It's like I wanted to desperately run, but I wanted to figure out the cause of this first. 2, the cats perked up. My youngest, who I'd never seen bare her teeth or growl before, was in a fighting stance. Hannibal was too, but he was hissing, looking back at me, then back at the red orbs, growling. When this happened, I literally shivered. A clouded sense of fear rushed over me, and I felt like I was stuck in place, like sleep paralysis, but I was able to move, and I knew that I was totally awake. The cats closed in on the red orbs. Hannibal could probably swat at them with no strain. When they blinked again, I realized this wasn't some illusion or deception. This wasn't a mirage. This was real. If the cats are reacting to it, then it's fucking real. The The most uncomfortable part was the fact that the things were right at my feet, on the wall underneath the window. If this was something paranormal, they could simply drag my feet or even reach out to touch me. I'm a paranoid person by default, and when I'm home, I question every type of movement in this house out of fear of an intruder. But this was different. This was different because I had a plan. If there is an intruder, but not a demon or a ghost or an entity. Soon, a very dark presence flooded over me. I felt it in my soul, and a scream burned my throat as I tried not to react too dramatically. I eventually slowly reached for my phone, asked Siri to turn on my flashlight. She obliged, and I shined it directly toward the red dots. They were gone. It was like the cats were taken out of the trance. As right when I did this, they immediately relaxed and looked at me with confusion. I had no answers for them, or myself. My youngest ended up sleeping on my chest, and Hannibal left the room in a rush. He won't come back in. To whoever that is, or whatever that was, I hope I never experience it again. I didn't sleep last night, probably won't tonight either. But I know that from now on, I'm sleeping with the light on. My boss came to see me when he died, to make sure I finished my job. So this just happened last week. The warehouse I work at was loading an empty trailer with a pallet jack. Once I filled it up 30 pallets of merchandise, I decided to have one last look and inspect everything one last time before I closed it and get ready to send it on its way. I walked in, and I was halfway in when I saw my boss standing there. I froze in fear, and I called out to him. I'm like, "Alex, when did you come in here?" He turned around and he was pale and ignored me and walked out. This wasn't like him. Alex never ignores me. But it was like if he didn't know me. Then walked out confused and went to his office. The lights were out. I told my coworker, why was Alex inside the container I was loading? I told her it's very strange he was in there just standing, and he even ignored me. She was like, that's impossible. He left for an errand like 20 minutes ago and hasn't come back. I didn't believe her. So I went to the parking lot and his car wasn't there. Once I saw that, I felt dizzy and almost had a heart attack. I still have the image fresh in my mind of what I saw in there. I saw him, but like I mentioned, it was more like a scary version of him. He looked pale and just scary and completely ignored me, like he didn't even see me. Then afterwards, the sheriff came and told us Alex had just been in a nasty car accident and didn't make it. I'm beyond terrified to go back to work, but I have to go. I can't explain what happened. No, I don't do drugs, nothing like that. I know what I saw. I saw his ghost to make sure I finished my job. I just hope he doesn't keep appearing. After that happened, another coworker told me she was in the break room and she felt like someone was behind her, staring at her. She turned around, and no one was there. Something strange after my grandpa passed away. Okay, so my grandpa passed away one day due to some internal bleeding caused by some injury he had a few days prior. When me and my family reached their place on the day he passed away, for the funeral and stuff, I was feeling really sad, but couldn't just cry it out like anyone else. I don't know, that was kind of strange because I was a kid who would easily cry, even over the smallest of things. Fast forward the same day, but at night, everyone preparing to sleep, setting up beds and stuff. It was kind of hard for me to fall asleep, but when I did, I actually saw a cloud of dust, in my dream of course, taking shape. It was forming a rough human figure, and it took some time for me to realize, but that formed my grandpa, but younger in age. I've never seen a younger photograph of him. And he told me some stuff which was kind of showing his love and affection towards me and my dad, his son, which he was never able to express. Then he said, "I'll always be watching over you," and then went on to climb up a shiny staircase which was going upwards, but too high for me to see. Is that normal, or was that just a dream? Rest in peace, Grandpa. Touched at the Denim Inn. When I was younger, my mom and I loved to travel to haunted locations in the region. One place we found ourselves at one summer was the Denim Inn in Monticello, Florida. Our room was on the second floor, second on the right. It faced out to the front yard. It was the height of summer, and the AC was not strong on the second floor. We settled in for the night. We decided to share the queen bed rather than mess up the day bed across the room as well. Due to the heat, the fan was going, and we kicked the heavy comforter off the bed right away and only slept with a thin sheet covering us. I wore only a long baggy t-shirt and underwear to go to sleep. By the next morning, my only limb fully covered by the thin sheet was my right leg. Around 6 that morning, I checked later, I felt a hesitant and gentle slide from my right ankle to my left knee. Half asleep and half awake, I simply kicked my foot. A little bit later, same touch, but now it's starting on the inside of my left wrist and moves to the inside of my left elbow. Same reaction, except now I mutter, "Stop." A little while later, same touch, except right inside elbow, down to the right inside wrist. Slightly stronger reaction, shook my arm and said louder, "Stop." A little while later, I felt the touch on the inside of my right knee. Problem, it was under the covers. At this moment, I sat up in bed loudly. "Stop touching me, just stop touching me." My mom woke up asking me what was wrong. My response, "Mama, something keeps touching me and won't leave me alone." We looked throughout the room, no mosquitoes, flies, or even loose threads on the sheets. Nothing should have or could have caused a distinct touching pattern like that. That morning at breakfast, we mentioned at the owner that we believed I was touched. Without any detail, she asked, "Was an arm or leg out of the blankets?" Yeah. "What room again?" I told her out her room name. It was by far the haunted room. She just nodded her head and responded, "That's Aunt Sarah." I had already heard about Aunt Sarah, the daughter of the original builder and last living inhabitant of the family of the house, but I wasn't in her room or her space, so she never crossed my mind. Once again, the owner said it's Aunt Sarah. She likes to tuck people in, so any time an arm or a leg is exposed, she tucks it in. I've also been getting more reports out of that room lately that Aunt Sarah is more active than any other. The other rooms have been fairly quiet. We've heard a good one out of that room, though. Do you mind if I share your story? Me? No, go ahead. We still had another night to stay, but nothing happened. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well, and all my limbs stayed fully covered. I'm a Southerner by life, heart, and family. I've never woken up because of the mosquito tracing lines down my arms or legs. I sleep with fans more often than not. I've never felt that from an overhead fan before. I will forever believe something or someone touched me. I guess with good intentions. Hesitant to start questioning this, but I think there's some entity in my apartment. I live in a trendy downtown area loft, somewhere inside a 100-year-old building. It used to be a clothing factory in the late 1800s into the 1950s. This is a short story, but I recently moved in, and one morning on the left side of the kitchen sink, it was filled with coffee mugs. They were neatly placed. My girlfriend didn't have an explanation, and neither did I, although I postulated that I may have been sleepwalking, which I haven't done since I was a small child, so not likely. The mugs didn't need to be cleaned, since we just moved and all the dishes were clean. It's just weird. My girlfriend and I have talked about it since, but I honestly feel like we just want to avoid the subject. What do you think? There's a little more to this. When I was putting dishes away on move-in week, a shelf collapsed and all the glass came avalanching onto my head and shoulders. Thankfully, I was wearing a ball cap and hoodie, so I wasn't injured, but we had a big mess to clean up. The shelf appeared sturdy as I was loading it up, but I don't understand how it broke. Two more things. While sitting in my office, I heard my girlfriend say, "Psst," to get my attention. I went over to her and said it back, asking Wei what she wanted to show me. She claimed she didn't say anything. My girlfriend and I have a black cat, and I've been seeing the cat out of the corner of my eye when it's not really there. Last night, my girlfriend said she hallucinated the cat, where he was not. My black dog following me. I've been carrying, and only let out to a few very close friends, but after recent instances, I feel I need more input. This starts when I was about 9 years old, living in a house me and my family knew was haunted. Footsteps in the attic, the occasional ghostly figure turning a corner down the hall, things being misplaced and then left in the open. We lived in between an old cemetery and an old church, and it was, of course, an old house. I've lived in Texas my whole life for context, since the only similar stories I've heard are old English ones, and this ghost or omen or entity has been following me wherever I go, it seems. At 9 years old, my childhood dog passed away. He was a German Shepherd and a sweet dog. He spent a lot of time with me, laying next to me while I would read or watch TV. Well, a week or so after he passed, I was in my room and on her bed reading as I always did. My mom's room was down the tile hallway that had no windows, and we kept the doors closed until we were inside the room, so the hallway was always dark. And I heard his nails clicking on the tile, as I was very accustomed to. He'd done it 100 times before. He stopped at the end of the hallway outside the door like always, just his dark head poking out around the corner of the doorframe. He was very well behaved and always waited on invitation to enter the room. So I glanced up from the book and patted the bed next to me without thinking, out of instinct, and went back to my book. Then I realized he'd died. I looked up and nothing was there. I also realized I hadn't heard the taps of his nails walking away. Spooked, of course, I left the room. But this is where things became odd, and I didn't notice this correlation for years. One of my very good friend's fathers passed away that night in his sleep from a heart attack. Now we fast forward a few years till I'm about 12, living in Wimbley, Texas. My then best friend, who's over at my house one night hanging out, we were sitting on the back porch watching the fireflies pulsing in the woods when she tapped me, getting my attention, and she pointed, asking if I saw what she was seeing, and sure enough, I did. About 20 feet into the tree line, there was a dark dog-like figure, about the size of a husky, but all black, trotting past, looking at us. Oddly stunning to look at as we just watched it pass by. We continued to hang out, and when it was time to go, she asked if I wanted to go with her family to the water park, like I had before, and I declined. I was planning on gaming that night, and the following day, when the water park trip was happening, I was woken up the next morning by my mom, informing me that my best friend had passed away that morning in a horrible car accident. That death really rocked my world. My first time losing a friend or anyone I knew well. Fast forward 3 more years. I'm 15. My older brother was in the army, and he came home some weekends and we shared a room. I fell asleep and dreamed of the dog walking past the foot of my bed and sat next to my brother's empty bed. The next week, he totaled his car in a DUI accident. The police on scene said that if he was an inch taller, his roof would have scalped him, if not decapitated him. Then 3 more years later, I'm 18. My brother's out of the military, getting back on his feet and living with us. And I have a similar dream, but this time, coming out of my bathroom, and my brother was in his bed. The dog just looked and panted. 3 nights later, my brother had this second and final DUI, this time breaking his spine. He's fully recovered, the lucky idiot. But now for our most recent encounter. An old friend of mine became pregnant about a year ago. My girlfriend isn't fond of her, so we don't keep in touch anymore. I had a dream of my girlfriend and her talking on the couch. I live in Texas still. She lives outstate and has for years. And the dog was sitting on the ground next to her. I woke up panicked, but it wasn't until a month later I checked on her to find out that she'd had a miscarriage. The dog never seemed scary or threatening, always calm and warm. It was a calming presence, regardless of what came after. It never seemed to be a threat. A large bird hanging around my infant son and I. I feel weird bringing this up in general, but looking for suggestions, so here I go. I told my husband maybe it'd be best to provide more backstory, so this might be helpful. We've been trying for children since marriage in 2014, never conceived after 3 years. Sought medical intervention. Without cause, I was diagnosed with anovulation since there was no reason for us not to conceive. Just wasn't happening for us. A few more years passed by, and we decided to do a type of fertility treatment. And we were successfully pregnant. On the first try, with our first son, we'll call him D. The pregnancy was going perfectly. 6 months pregnant, I started not feeling well late at night. We went to the hospital and was in preterm labor. We had our son in a few hours and he passed shortly after he was born. Without cause, no explanation why preterm labor happened. Absolutely tragic. He was born and passed August 2021. 7 years of infertility, medical pregnancy, and a loss. I was done with family planning, or at least for a while. When I spontaneously conceived 2 months later with our second son, this is where my husband started his post yesterday. Since having our second son in July 2022 is when I first noticed this bird thing, is what I say anyway. I first saw it maybe the night I had our son or the night after. All I remember is it being very, very late, and I first noticed it. It perches in a windowsill, usually around the baby. First when he was 2 days old in the hospital, then never saw it again until a handful of times, and now I see it more frequently, as our son is now 7 months old. Just trying to understand what it is. The obvious here is, am I hallucinating? I've been mentally evaluated for PTSD that I had been having since our first son's passing, and my therapist didn't have much to say about it other than it was odd. I've seen it with and without antidepressants. Overall, seen it 5, maybe 6 times. I respond seeing it, and if you get a feeling someone calls out your name, and if you do a double take, and it's there, just perched, looking down and away. Or you're passing a room and you think you see something in the corner of your eye, so you double take, and yep, there it is. It's a dark blue or purple with a pink shine to it. Smallish head with a raven's beak and a long tail. I don't feel like it's harmful, but I'm also not naive. I never communicate, and I've never tried to. I'd rather not communicate with it either. But when I saw it most recently, it wasn't over our 7-month-year-old. It was hanging out with me in the living room, ruffling up, and it's adjusting its feet. We've been having activity in our house lately. I, a 26-year-old female, have always been fascinated by all things paranormal, but there was a time in my life where I didn't totally believe. I was open to the idea of some sort of paranormal entity existing somewhere, but in my heart, didn't really put much stock into it. Over the years, that's drastically changed. Here's one of the encounters that made me a believer. When my wife and I were newly married, we were very close with another couple who lived in our area. We would travel with them, double date with them, and we considered them our best friends. One day, they went out of town and asked us to watch their animals for them. They had a cat, a bearded dragon, a red iguana, and 2 rats. We agreed to watch them, and they left. I worked very close to their home, so I would go over to the house once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and on my lunch hour, and then again in the evening. Usually I'd be alone for the morning and afternoon visits due to my job being closest to their home, and then my wife would join me in the evening visit. One day during my afternoon visit, I purposely left the lights in their home off. They were getting enough natural light through the house to see fairly well without the lights on that day, and I wanted to save them on their electricity bill while they were gone. Again, this was a conscious choice to leave their lights off. This was something I actively thought about. I did not touch their lights after I checked on the animals. I went back to work, leaving every light switch untouched. When my wife and I arrived back that evening, I froze in the driveway. I could see from where I was standing outside that the entryway and hallway lights were both on. I told my wife, I didn't turn those lights on. I didn't even touch them. She asked me if I was sure, and I told her that I was 1,000% sure. We thought that maybe someone from their HOA had come by, or one of their family members, or that someone had noticed that they were out of town and broke in. We each put a car key between our knuckles and entered the house. The house was eerily quiet. I couldn't hear any of the animals moving around, and the air felt stale, like I could have choked on it, kind of stale. We slowly made our way through the house, checking the closets and looking for any sign of disturbance. Every light was on in every room that we entered. After we had checked every room and absolutely nothing was out of place, we both relaxed somewhat. I even started to gaslight myself into believing that I had somehow turned on every single light in every single room, even the rooms I hadn't entered. Suddenly we heard a loud thud come from the reptile room, the one we had literally just left. The thud was loud enough that the house shook. We threw the door open and nothing was disturbed. Nothing had fallen. Nothing had moved, not an inch. The only thing that had changed was the bearded dragon. The bearded dragon's enclosure was large and positioned on the floor, with a sliding glass door in the front. The dragon, who had been peacefully resting when we checked just a minute before, was now rhythmically tapping its nose against the glass in a perfect pattern. Tap, 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 over and over again. It was almost robotic. I stared in disbelief. I'd never seen an animal behave like that before. I walked over to the enclosure and gently slid the glass door open. The dragon continued trying to tap on the glass, even though it was no longer there. For another second or two, and then suddenly its beard went pitch black. It scrambled out of the enclosure and took off across the floor, headed straight for the door. Luckily, my wife was able to close the door before he escaped. Once he reached the door, he started rhythmically tapping on it, the same pattern he had on the glass. Tap, 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 tap. Suddenly, on the other side of the door, we heard another loud thud, even louder than the first one. And, in the same second, the cat started screaming. Not meowing, screaming. It was a horrible sound. But I didn't have time to react before I heard clanging and clattering in the other enclosures behind me. The iguana was wildly whipping its tail against the side of the enclosure and almost hissing. It was a horrifying sight. I quickly picked up the bearded dragon and put him back in his enclosure, where he continued tapping immediately, while my wife grabbed for the doorknob. I'll never forget the fear and disbelief in her voice when she said, "It won't open." I flew to the door and started yanking as hard as I could. The knob wouldn't even turn. Not like it was broken, like someone was holding it from the other side. I started banging on the door and screaming, true panic setting in. My head felt fuzzy and my chest felt tight, and I almost thought I was going to pass out. Then suddenly, it all stopped. The cat stopped screaming, the iguana stopped whipping, the dragon stopped tapping, and the doorknob was easily moved. When we left that room, the rest of the lights in the house were now off. My wife and I bolted out of the house as fast as we could and were silent the whole drive home. The next day, I had almost convinced myself that it was a fluke and that the animals had upset each other. I talked to my friend to tell her about the weird experience, but she replied, "Oh, I forgot to mention, we've been having activity in the house lately." "What do you mean by activity?" I responded, to which she explained that the former resident of her home had been an elderly man that passed away in the home after owning it for 40 years. She told me that ever since they had started the renovations, she had seen a male figure standing in the corners of the home or at the base of the stairs. That would rile the animals up, and that would often mess with the lights in the house too. She said that she had never seen him be violent, more mischievous, as if he was throwing little fits about the changes that they were making. After that, I reevaluated my whole look and belief on the paranormal. I sure as hell believe now. We all dreamed about her. This is going to be all over the place, but I just want to share something creepy with people who might find it interesting. I had my baby in 2015. When I came home from the hospital with her, I think something dark came back with us. Either that or it was something attached to my ex, her father, because that was when he moved in too. He was a dark person, interested in demons, and he was going through addiction, so I would not be surprised if he brought it. Anyway, shortly after I gave birth, my ex and I noticed a presence in the bedroom we were sleeping with at my parents' house. He heard a female singing voice in there and thought it was the ghost of my grandma, since the room we were sleeping in was hers before she died. Then I started having nightmares about a tall, bony female figure with long, stringy hair. I strongly felt her presence in my room, and I'd see her as soon as I'd close my eyes at night. Before having my baby, the room felt totally normal. I became so afraid of that room that I'd avoid it at all costs until bedtime, and every time I'd open the door, I was expecting to see her there. I didn't tell anyone because I felt crazy, and then my ex started to wake up with scratches all over his chest and back. He mentioned a nightmare about a demonic woman. I asked him to describe to me, and he described the exact same figure I was dreaming about. I continued avoiding the room in the daytime and just dealt with the creepy feelings at night. After I left him, the nightmares started subsiding. One night when my daughter was about a year old, I stayed up all night cleaning and reorganizing things in the living room area. My daughter was upstairs asleep. My parents were also upstairs asleep, and it was 3 a.m. I heard clear as day a woman singing, "Merrily, merrily, 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 life is but a dream," in my bedroom. I thought it was my mom, but she was asleep. My daughter had no toys that sang that song. We moved out a few years later, and there were no more encounters. I actually mostly forgot about her until some reason last year I had a dream about her again. My husband was away for business and my daughter slept in the bed with me. In the dream, I was laying in bed with my daughter the same way we fell asleep, except I was in that bedroom in my parents' house. I was facing the closet and the lady was standing there looking at us. Then I fell asleep in the dream and woke up in another dream where it became semi-lucid. I knew I was dreaming, but something felt off, and I was uncomfortable, so I shouted, "I want to wake up." I woke up again in the room, and the woman was still there staring at my daughter. I then actually woke up to my daughter crying and shaking me. She said, "Is she real?" My stomach dropped, and I asked, "Is who real?" She said, "The lady." "What lady?" And she goes, "The lady in the bedroom at Pop and Mimi's house." So now I'm wide awake and terrified, and I have questions. I asked what the lady looks like, and she described the same one. Bony, long, dark hair, tall, everything except for one detail. She doesn't have legs, she has wheels instead. I asked if she'd ever seen her at Pop and Mimi's house. She said, "I don't know. I can't remember if it was dreams or if it was real. Is she real?" I told her I don't think she's real, because my daughter is very sensitive and easily scared. So I figured it would just be better if she just forgets. Really freaky. We haven't had any more dreams since. How to contact or communicate with ghosts. So the reason for these questions is that a good friend of mine is experiencing more and more ghost-related stuff at home. It started about 1 or 2 years ago. He lives with his brother and his mother in a very old house. One evening he was alone at home, lying in bed, when he heard a knocking on his door. He thought his family had come home early and asked what was up. He got no response. So he checked the door, and there was no one around. Since then, the knocking came more often and in the evening, but never more than 1 time a night. It knocks 2 or 3 times slowly and then stops. We regularly speak on the phone in the evening and even heard the knocking. He then always goes to check the door, and there's nothing. In case someone's wondering, no, he never asked the ghost to come in or invited it otherwise into his room. So one day he asked his friend about it, if they had something like this too. They both stated that they also had a knocking on their doors frequently. His mother also said that one night she felt something big crawl into her bed. No, they didn't have a cat or any other pets. And last night his mother was standing in her room when she heard some heavy breathing next to her. It seemed that the ghost is manifesting stronger in the house over time. My friend also said that the knocking got a little bit louder too. I heard from a different friend that if a ghost knocks 3 times, that it stands for the Trinity and a sign of an evil spirit. So since I'm very invested in these events, I was thinking to myself that one could perhaps contact a ghost or prevent it from doing harm to the family.